Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Freethinking podcast. My name is Scott Olson here with Dr. Tim Stratton. And today, Tim, let's talk about love.
All right, let's do it. I love you, man.
I love you too, buddy. And I have the choice to do that, which
Yes.
apparently you believe is pretty necessary for this to be anything other than just Stockholm Syndrome.
That's right. Not just a choice, but a libertarian choice.
It's the best kind.
Free will, yes, free will in a libertarian sense.
Yes.
It's needed for at least the best kind of love.
All right. Well, as we've been doing in our previous episodes, we've been commenting on the free will show's recent episode. Well, it's probably not recent at this point, but somewhat recent.
A few weeks old.
A few weeks old episode of their podcast where they took listener questions. And this one, this particular question that we're about to get into is about true love not being possible without free will.
Our listener says, true love is not possible without free will. And yeah, I think a lot of people, when they start thinking about, think about a robot who's not, or an AI that's not very sophisticated, who's just been programmed to have certain responses. Maybe they're conscious, maybe not, but in any case, they seem forced into, responding to a person. Could you have a genuine, loving friendship with that programmed, non-free thing? I think a lot of people think no.
Yeah, another way to come at this is to part of this is science fiction, maybe fantasy, of stories of love potions. I think I might have even mentioned this in the first season. If we imagine a sufficiently strong love potion, where it's basically a manipulation kind of worry, where we manipulate somebody into loving another person, and the other person found out about it, it seems like that it's going to tarnish the relationship, that it won't be, I think most people will judge that it's not real, genuine love. It's not true love, whatever you want to define that as. It's something else. There might be like really strong feelings of affection, maybe infatuation, but it seems to diminish the relationship.
Yeah, Matt just hit the ball out of the park right there. I think he's exactly right. In fact, I've got an article on the Freethinking Ministries website called Harley Quinn plus the Joker equals true love, ? And I think in that article, it becomes obvious that libertarian freedom is required for true love, or like I said, the best kind of love, or at least the kind of love worth wanting. I actually made a short video on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching the video, click here. If you're listening to the podcast, go to our YouTube channel and look that up. I think it's only around a 4-minute video. But let me read a segment from the blog article here. This is what I said. I said, according to the Suicide Squad movie, the Joker kidnapped and brainwashed Harley against her will. The Joker forced himself upon her and causally determined her to be unable to resist him. Left to Harley's own devices, she would always reject the Joker if given a choice. But the Joker took any ability or opportunity away from her to choose otherwise. She's been manipulated, she's suffered psychological trauma, and she's been raped against her will, even though the Joker has forced her to think and act according to his will. And I'll just say that the Joker has done something to Harley to change her will against her will. So now that her will is to have sex with the Joker whenever the Joker wants it. But this is horrible. Anyway, I continued. I said, you see, the Joker has no idea what it truly means to be loved. All he has is a kidnapped woman who has no choice but to follow him. She literally has no ability or opportunity to do otherwise. She's basically no more than a programmed robot. I continued and said, I'm sure that the Joker would have preferred it if Harley Quinn would have freely chosen to love and follow him, as that would have brought him more glory. But since she would not freely choose to be with the Joker, he had to force himself upon her against her will. The Joker simply came irresistible, as she had her ability and any opportunity to resist stolen from her. Now she has no ability but to follow him and utter the words, "I love Mr. J." Now, this relationship is not the paradigm of love as many comic book junkies imagine. No, true love requires a legitimate and genuine choice on the part of both parties involved. Both persons must freely choose to enter into a romantic marriage relationship for it to count as true love. Otherwise, the most a person could hope for is something akin to Stockholm Syndrome. But that's not true love. Rather, Stockholm Syndrome is psychological trauma. This is not true love. This is pure evil. So that's the segment from my article. If you want more, we'll put the link in the description here. Scott, you can put it in the show notes in the podcast, or you can just go to our YouTube channel and look up the short video I did on the topic here.
Very cool. I have a couple of thoughts, and just thinking off the top of my head here, the Joker example, it's fairly brutal in the way that he manipulates her. Whereas perhaps there are examples that you could conceive of where it's, I don't know, less of a brutal thing. And maybe that makes some sort of difference. But again, I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we can, let's just say the Joker did it in the least brutal way possible, but he somehow changed Harley's nature and will against her nature and will. That still seems to me that there's something wrong there. It seems like your will should not be causally determined to change against your will. If she wants nothing to do with the Joker and would never choose to be with him, but the Joker in the least brutal way and the most peaceful way possible changed her will and her nature against her will and her nature. That seems intuitive to me to still be evil. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, it could be, but at the same time, it's okay. The least brutal ways to change someone's will seems to just be persuasion, which feels that's not similar to what perhaps we might think of as some sort of causal determinism.
Right. I'd count that as influence.
Right.
A causal deterministic force.
Which is not sufficient to remove free will influence.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was the first thought. The second one is there almost seems to need to be some sort of intentionality involved with love. Because if you think about it, if all love is just, a chemical reaction in your brain that causes you to feel these certain fuzzy feelings towards somebody, that I suppose this is an argument based on intuition, but that doesn't seem to be what we think of as love. It's not, oh, my brain happens to be doing this. There seems to be, that seems to be at least part of it. But another part of it is there is a directedness from you towards that other person, rather than just, oh, my chemicals happen to be a certain way in my brain.
Right. Yeah, it seems intuitive to me that there has to be some choice involved. And like I said, that's a choice referring to the ability to choose between alternative options, each of which are compatible with one's nature in a circumstance where the antecedent conditions are insufficient to necessitate one's choice. So that's libertarian freedom.
Right
there. Not just that's not just sourcehood. That's I mean, I think sourcehood is definitely necessary. But it seems to me that there needs to be something more than that, maybe an alternative possibilities.
Yeah. Well, Taylor goes on.
And a lot of people think whether you genuinely love someone depends to some extent on your history. If you were to clone me and my clone was to, go hang out with my kids or my wife, even if my clone had all of these pseudo memories of past with, my wife and kids, they wouldn't be genuine. And it might be I think it's intuitive to say that my clone doesn't really love my kids or my wife.
Yeah, that's a good point. However, man, all I gotta say is go watch WandaVision. When I watched that, I was thinking what Taylor was saying here. That was in my mind the whole time. But man, that kind of messed with my intuition. So yeah, I need to think about that one a little bit more. But I think Taylor's probably right. But yeah, that series WandaVision, that'll mess with you.
I have not seen it yet, but I
Ooh.
need to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next question says, can you talk about the political implications of convincing people that we do not have free will?
Having interviewed our free will skeptic, Greg Caruso, in episode 4, I can imagine some things he would say in response.
Yeah, definitely.
I think ultimately he would want to say that there are political implications of adopting free will skepticism, but they're good implications, that a lot of problematic treatment of, say, criminals could be improved by giving up the view of ourselves as free and responsible.
Yeah, that's probably a common theme from free will skeptics, is that things will improve by getting rid of this concept in our daily practices. But there's also some evidence on the other side that giving up the view of ourselves as free would lead to bad consequences. There has been some psychological research that shows that people sometimes act badly when you convince them that they don't have free will.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that Matt brought this up. I've seen these studies as well, and it's really quite attention-getting. It seems that people who do not believe that they could have done otherwise, or people who believe they are causally determined by something or someone else, they begin to act badly, or to put it in Christian terms, they begin to sin, or at the very least, it becomes easier for them to sin. And I think this is probably because they begin to lose the concept of personal responsibility, especially in that all-important desert sense that we've talked about. And after all, if something or someone else causally determines, for example, all right, let's just say if something or someone else causally determines the Calvinist to cheat on his wife, then the Calvinist possessed no opportunity to do anything other than cheat on his wife. Thus, when the Calvinist, or the determinist in general, cheats on his wife, he doesn't really need to apologize to her. He can simply say, wow, I'm glad that's over. And his wife, she can't really be angry at him. She's angry at God, the one who causally determined her husband to cheat on her. So that just doesn't seem intuitive at all. And according to Scripture, according to 1 Corinthians 10:13, if that's true, then every time Calvinist is tempted to sin and cheat on his wife, for example, God will provide a way of escape so that he does not have to cheat on his wife. Thus, when the Calvinist cheats on his wife, sorry to pick on Calvinists here, this is just an example, right? But if the Calvinist cheats on his wife, he did not have to. There was an alternative possibility actually available to the Calvinist, so he could have done otherwise. So the Calvinist then cannot say, the devil made me do it. He better not say God made me do it. No, here, the Calvinist, the determinist here, is responsible. He is to blame because he could have done otherwise and taken the way of escape God provided. But he failed to seize the opportunity God provided. So although the Calvinist is typically a determinist, here we see biblically that sometimes he has an ability and opportunity to do otherwise. And so determinism, although he affirms determinism, it can't be true. So yeah, what do you think, Scott?
Well, I think it's like, as we parsed out in an earlier episode, it's some Calvinists that would affirm that type of exhaustive determinism. Some of them would say, no, that's still our choice to sin. in the alternative possibilities sense, even
Right.
to sin, not just, we just don't have that choice when it comes to our salvation.
Right. And I can, that brand of Calvinist, I'm so thankful for you guys. If you're out there watching, Greg Kokel is one of the leading Calvinists on that side of things. And man, if I were to be convinced, say that Tulip were true, I would be that kind of a Calvinist. But there's no way I could affirm this exhaustive divine determinism, this Ed view. It just doesn't make sense of metaphysical reality, and it doesn't make sense of Scripture either.
Yeah. So Taylor goes on and says,
I will say a lot of people, when they raise this kind of objection about, like, they're worried about the breakdown of civilization or something.
Yeah.
I think what they're thinking that people are convinced of is that, like, nothing that we do matters, that, like, no matter what we do, the same thing's going to happen.
Yeah, and I would just say it's not just that no matter what we do, the same thing is going to happen, right? This is, I think, actually illustrated in the second episode of Loki. I feel like all we do is reference Marvel, and maybe DC a little bit and Star Wars, but so many great analogies and illustrations. But
I did Terminator on the last episode.
Oh yeah, well,
so we're branching out.
Yeah, all right, and we'll get into some Matrix here soon, I'm sure.
Of course.
But check out the second episode of Loki, because it's not just that no matter what we do, the same thing is going to happen. The vital point not to be missed is that if exhaustive divine determinism, if Ed is true, then no matter what we do, it was causally determined by something or someone else, right? That is, no matter what happens, it was causally determined by something or someone else. So nothing else could have happened as far as it's up to us. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah. So Taylor goes on.
Free will skeptics don't have to be that kind of, fatalist. They can think, well, we can still deliberate about what to do. We can still have caring relationships. We don't even have to give up the idea that there are better and worse ways of acting. It's just what we're getting rid of is this idea that we basically deserve praise and blame. So once you realize that's the view of free will skeptics, or at least the typical view, maybe the worries about political ramifications goes away a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think it does. I definitely don't see it that way. And I think that's because if everything about humanity is always, think about it, if everything about humanity is always causally determined by something or someone else, then so is our deliberation, right? I spent time discussing this in my book. I also wrote about it quite a bit in my 50-page rejoinder to Guillaume Bignon. So I encourage people to read that. But bottom line, if something or someone else causally determines exactly how I think about something, how? Think about that how. Not just about exactly what I think about, but how I think of and about it. All these evaluations and judgments, right? If something or someone else causally determines exactly how I think about something, then I don't stand in a position to choose what or how I ought to think, right? Or how I ought to think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
My deliberation, every thought, every evaluation, every judgment, and the whole process was causally determined by something other than me. I'm just a passive cog on exhaustive determinism. So the free will skeptic might experience the illusion of engaging in the process of deliberation, but he himself is not in any control of how he deliberates, right? That's up to something or someone else. Something or someone else has decided that for the free will skeptic, and he can only hope and assume that he's being causally determined to deliberate correctly, but he can't rationally affirm it. He's nothing more than a passive cog on his view, or dust in the wind, right? And his deliberations are at the mercy of the whims of something or someone else. And I think that's a huge problem.
I like that you put in quotes his, because you and I have actually talked about this. I don't know if we've ever talked about it on an episode, but how on an exhaustive determinist view, the I seems to disappear. And I think you even have an article, something to that effect.
Yeah. It's called the vanishing I.
Right. And so the idea is, if everything about me is determined by things other than myself, what am I then? Like, what is it? How am I just not an extension of that thing that's determining me? Which maybe some people are fine with, but that seems to at least remove both, like, kind of what you say, moral and rational responsibility, because it's not us. There's no us to be responsible. We don't hold that responsibility. It's that thing that's determining us. Like, in the same way, my hand doesn't have its own, it's not an I. Like, the hand doesn't have a self. It's determined completely by me, what I want it to do. If you're if you believe that I have sourcehood and making it do things. But and so when it's not that my hand is blameworthy of things. It's me. Like, it's the thing that's actually originating those thoughts, which is why I think Jesus says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off, right?
Right. What? That's a good point. Yeah, a lot of people that I talk to seem to think that if they merely have intentional states of consciousness or internal awareness, that somehow makes them an active agent. But it doesn't, because if you're in what you're aware of and is, so this is called intentionality in philosophy. So an intentional state of consciousness, if that's being aware of or about something else. But if what you are thinking of or about is causally determined by something or somebody other than you, then you're not responsible for what you're thinking about. You're still a passive cog. And moreover, and more importantly, the how now is extremely vital not to miss. If the way you think about your internal states of consciousness, or what you're what you're internally aware of, or what you're thinking of or about, if the how, the way you evaluate or judge that, is also causally determined by something other than you, right? That's why the article is called The Vanishing I. Where did you go? The thing that I call I, where is it? It's just what I'm thinking of or about, but that's not up to me. And how I'm thinking of and about it, that's not up to me. And it's not up to the thing Tim Stratton calls I, right? Or the thing that you call I. It's up to something or somebody else. And so I just think just merely having this intentional states of consciousness or internal awareness, it doesn't get anybody out of the sinking boat. If they want to affirm exhaustive divine determinism or exhaustive determinism of anything.
Right. Yeah. And I think these questions, because the original question was about the political implications of believing you're determined. The interesting thing for me is, at what point is the government sufficient to be determining our actions, and thus perhaps removing our responsibility? Because, okay, think about it this way. If our tax dollars are going to fund abortions, for example, that I don't think I'm responsible for that, even though I am making an act to give them my money. Like, I didn't have a choice in the matter about whether or not my money is going to do this thing. And so
there is violence, a threat of violence behind that.
Exactly.
So you're coerced.
Right. And so there's almost a political determinism that, in my mind, can remove our responsibility of things that aren't really up to us. So
yeah, well, again, I think this is the topic for another podcast.
Yeah,
but I think it's one that we do need to talk about.
For sure.
These things, they're not just fun philosophical puzzles or theological issues to address. They have real political ramifications. And I always say you should not let your politics determine your theology. You ought to let your metaphysical worldview and your theological views determine your politics. But definitely, if one believes that we have libertarian freedom, I think that does affect how you will see things politically.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the next question says, imagine a Frankfurt-style case where the agent contemplating two courses of action, say one blameworthy and one praiseworthy, chooses to carry out a morally blameworthy act and does so of their own volition. But the observer both knew what the agent was going to do and directly manipulated the circumstances surrounding the agent in order to bring about the desired result without directly manipulating the agent's thought or directly forcing their hand. According to semi-compatibilism, would the agent still be morally responsible? Should the agent be punished if the one carrying out the punishment for the blameworthy act is the observer?
Okay. Well, if freedom permitting circumstances are manipulated, right? If the circumstances are manipulated, but still freedom permitting for the agent, and an agent still possesses the opportunity and ability to refrain from sin, but the non-manipulated, non-causally determined agent still freely chooses to sin, and he did not have to sin, as we saw in 1 Corinthians 10:13, then yes, the agent should be punished because it is a blameworthy act in which he could have avoided. So that is to say, the libertarian free agent possessed the power and opportunity to avoid sin, but chose to sin anyway. So, to provide an illustration, again, no analogy or illustration is ever perfect, but I think this might help to get us closer to truth here. Now, the FBI often sets up sting operations to catch those who attempt, say, for example, to molest children, right? Now, so the FBI sets up these sting operations to catch these child molesters in circumstances that are set up and manipulated by the FBI, right? So the FBI then arrests these would-be child rapists when they see the individual was choosing to follow through and act on this opportunity to hopefully, from the bad guy's perspective, abduct a child. Now, I think most people possess the intuition that the FBI should be praised in these instances, and that those who are willing to sexually assault children, even if the counterfactual intervener steps in and does not allow any abduction to occur, then these depraved individuals deserve blame and appropriate punishment, even though they thankfully could not pull it off and do otherwise, right? So I think most people's intuition is that the would-be child molester here deserves blame. Now, by the way, let me add that we also learn from punishment. So it's not an either or here. We can be blameworthy and also learn from it. So there are multiple reasons, I think, to punish wrongdoers. But with eternity in mind, hell is specifically reserved for those who freely, in a libertarian sense, refuse to learn from pain, evil, and affliction. And I write about this in my book and specifically reference 2 Corinthians 4:17 to support my case.
This is interesting because I don't know that I entirely share your intuition here. Because it
About
seems
the FBI sting operation.
So, in one sense, okay. So one, I think a lot of people would say it's good that they are arrested and thrown in prison because they have this capacity to do so. Because it's better for society, like just to protect them. But I don't know that that's a punishment, because a punishment seems to necessitate an act having been committed, whereas in this instance, nothing had actually happened because I prevented the rape from occurring. And so I'm not opposed to that as a concept. The issue I have is if these FBI agents had never set up these circumstances, and would that person have tried to rape a child? And if they would not have, then I don't think they do deserve blame because they hadn't acted on whatever impulses they would have had.
Right. So they, I think, I mean, I've seen some videos. It's been a while, but if memory serves, I mean, they don't just, they really make sure that this guy is actively pursuing. He's trying to get this minor who he knows is a minor. to meet up with him. So they build a good case that he was actively and intentionally trying to get alone with this person. And I think they even have these the so-called minors reaching out to him, saying what they want to do with them if they get together and stuff. So it's, I don't know all the details, but a couple videos that I've seen of this several years ago now show that, man, this is a really bad guy. He was trying to have sex with somebody who he knew was a minor, but it was a sting operation, and they busted him. So I think, I don't know, my intuition is,
I think that, but I think that's a different. I was excluding that case. I was saying if they would have done that in other circumstances as well, and this is just an attempt to catch them in that circumstance, in that act, so that they can put them away, then yes, I think that intuition's correct. What I'm saying is, if they're not, because you see this, I think, more often with drug busts, drug sting operations, where they're not really actively trying to do the act that the FBI is catching them for. Or actually, even a bigger example, I don't remember how long ago this was, but there was actually a whole example where the FBI manipulated this guy into planning a whole terrorist plot, and then they busted him and arrested him for terrorism, which actually is a great example to your point, which is, in that situation, the FBI actually ended up manipulating this guy into committing an act that he wouldn't have otherwise committed. And then they arrested him and said, hey, we foiled this terror plot. Where my intuition, and probably yours, I'll try and find that afterwards, because it was a couple of years ago. But our intuition there is, well, hang on, this guy wasn't planning on committing a terrorist plot until you reached out and manipulated him into doing so. And so I think that type of situation actually backs up your point as well.
Yeah. I think here's the bottom line. The question is about manipulating circumstances as opposed to manipulating an agent. And I think as long as the agent is free in a libertarian sense and always possesses the ability to take the way of escape that God promises to provide, then God here in this scenario, I think it's totally fine for him to create us in an environment in which we can sin or not sin, and then always gives us a way of escape and ability to do otherwise. And so that when we do sin, we are to blame because we could have done otherwise. Now, if causal determinism is true, if exhaustive divine determinism is true, and everything about humanity is causally determined, then when I sin, I never really had access to that way of escape. That was an illusion. It wasn't an opportunity for me to actually seize. And so that kind of a scenario, I don't think the human would be responsible in a desert sense. But yeah, I think as long as the circumstances are manipulated, but the agent is always free to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing, then I think my intuition is, if the agent does the wrong thing, he deserves some blame. Maybe not as much as in other situations, but he's definitely blameworthy. What do you think?
No. Well, I think that's almost what Molinists say, is that God does. I think the word manipulate probably is uncomfortable for a lot of people, but he creates circumstances to accomplish the ends that he desires. But he leaves the agent's will intact to act however they would act in those circumstances he sets up. So again, I don't think we want to say, and again, I've heard it said that manipulation is just persuasion you don't like, but I don't think we want to say it's like a malevolent manipulation, but it is similar in that sense from a Molinist perspective.
Yeah, and I'm fine with influence. But influence is different than causal determinism, and so many people conflate those two concepts, and that leads to misunderstandings across the board.
Well, Tim, do you think we should wrap it up there for this episode?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. We'll come back next week.
Sounds good. See you guys.